Hi guys, tonight we begin a calm journey into the life of a man whose quiet curiosity changed how humanity sees itself. His name was Charles Darwin, and through patient observation and endless wonder, he uncovered one of the deepest secrets of life: how every living thing is connected through time. This is not the story of conflict or glory, but of thought, of a man who chose to listen to nature until it spoke. So let's drift softly into the life of the man who explained life's secret. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. Charles Robert Darwin was born on February 12, 1809, in the small English town of Shrewsbury. His family was wealthy and respected. His father, Robert Darwin, was a successful doctor, and his mother, Susanna, came from the famous Wedgwood family of pottery makers. From an early age, Charles was surrounded by books, ideas, and the gentle hum of curiosity. He wasn't a brilliant student in the traditional sense. In fact, teachers often called him distracted, too interested in beetles and stones to care about Latin or math. But that restlessness was not laziness. It was the beginning of a lifelong hunger to understand the world. As a child, Darwin loved collecting things: shells, insects, minerals, anything that told a small story about the natural world. He once wrote in his notes that the smallest creature could open the mind to the grandest truths. He found beauty not in power, but in the silent design of life. When he was 16, his father sent him to Edinburgh University to study medicine, following in the family's tradition. But Charles could not stand the sight of blood, and he was quickly bored by lectures about the human body. Instead, he spent his time wandering the shores, studying marine life with local naturalists. Those quiet walks by the sea were his first lessons in real science, not from books, but from the world itself. 2 years later, realizing that medicine was not his path, Darwin transferred to Cambridge to study theology. Ironically, it was there, in the halls meant for future clergymen, that his journey toward the theory of evolution truly began. He became fascinated by botany and geology, attending lectures by Professor John Henslow, who saw something in the shy young man that others had missed. Henslow described Darwin as a curious observer with a quiet eye, and soon the two became close friends. In those years, Darwin felt a growing sense that nature was not static or fixed. He began to wonder, if God created every species as it was, why did some animals seem so similar yet slightly different? Why did fossils of extinct creatures resemble living ones? These were dangerous thoughts for his time, but for Darwin, they were simply questions waiting for answers. After graduating in 1831, Darwin was offered the chance of a lifetime to join the HMS Beagle as the ship's naturalist on a voyage around the world. At first, his father refused, calling it a waste of time, but after some persuasion from family and friends, permission was granted. On December 27, 1831, the Beagle set sail from Plymouth Harbour, carrying a 22-year-old Darwin toward the unknown. The ocean voyage would last nearly 5 years and change the course of science forever. Darwin brought with him notebooks, magnifying glasses, and a patient mind ready to learn. He had no idea that he was about to witness the hidden patterns of life on Earth, patterns that would take him decades to understand and a lifetime to share. The voyage of the Beagle was both an adventure and an education. For nearly 5 years, Darwin sailed across oceans and continents, from the wild coasts of South America to the volcanic islands of the Pacific. Every morning he stepped onto new shores with his notebook in hand, eager to observe, collect, and think. He wasn't simply looking for strange animals or beautiful landscapes. He was searching for meaning in their patterns. In South America, Darwin saw fossils of giant creatures, ancient sloths and armadillos, buried beneath layers of rock. What struck him most was how similar they were to smaller species still living nearby. It was as if nature had reused its own designs, reshaping them across time. That thought quietly stayed with him. The Beagle's journey took him through deserts, jungles, and mountains. In Patagonia, he marvelled at the endless plains where wind and silence ruled. In the Andes, he climbed peaks that had once been under the sea and found seashells embedded in stone. The earth, he wrote, is not a place of stability, but of movement. He began to suspect that change, not permanence, was the true law of nature. But it was in the Galapagos Islands that Darwin's great insight began to take root. The islands were small, lonely dots in the Pacific, each with its own unique life. On one island, he saw finches with large, thick beaks for cracking nuts. On another, finches with thin, sharp beaks for catching insects. At first, he thought they were different species. Later, he realized they were all variations of the same bird, each adapted to its island's needs. That realization disturbed him. If species could change depending on their environment, then perhaps they weren't fixed at all. Perhaps life was not a collection of perfect, unchanging forms, but a living story, one that evolved slowly, shaped by time and necessity. Still, Darwin didn't rush to conclusions. He filled notebook after notebook with sketches, measurements, and thoughts, always careful not to jump ahead of the evidence. During long nights at sea, Darwin would sit on deck and watch the stars. The vastness of the sky reminded him of how small and interconnected everything was. He once wrote, "When I consider all that I have seen, I feel both wonder and humility." The Beagle became not just a ship of exploration, but a floating classroom for a young man trying to understand creation itself. When the voyage finally ended in 1836, Darwin returned to England a different person. He was no longer a student or a traveller, he was a thinker, carrying inside him questions that no one had yet dared to ask. He had seen too much to believe that life was simple or static. Nature, he realised, was a force of quiet creativity, shaping life in ways that defied old explanations. Back home, his family and friends welcomed him with pride. Unaware that the observations from his voyage would one day challenge the very foundations of how people understood life, Darwin himself did not yet grasp the full weight of what he had discovered. He simply knew that something profound was waiting to be explained, something that would take him the next 20 years to unravel. Back in England, the world seemed smaller to Darwin after the vastness of the Beagle's journey, yet the real exploration was only beginning. This time, not across oceans, but inside his own thoughts. His notebooks overflowed with sketches of shells, fossils, and birds, but behind every drawing was a growing question. How does life change? He did not yet have the words evolution or natural selection, but the idea had already taken root quietly in his mind, like a seed waiting for light. After the voyage, Darwin settled into a routine of calm study. He lived in London for several years, sorting and cataloguing the thousands of specimens he had collected. His house became a miniature museum, shelves of labelled jars, bones, feathers and stones. Scientists from all over England came to examine his findings. Many praised his patience and precision, yet few knew the depth of the ideas that were forming behind his quiet smile. Among his closest friends was the geologist Charles Lyell, whose book Principles of Geology had influenced Darwin deeply. Lyell argued that the Earth's landscapes had been shaped over vast ages by slow, natural processes, wind, rain, erosion, not sudden miracles. Darwin wondered if life might follow the same rule. Could slow, gradual change also shape living beings, just as it shaped mountains and seas? As he analysed his Galapagos notes, Darwin noticed patterns that couldn't be coincidence. Finches, tortoises and iguanas seemed to vary slightly from island to island, each form perfectly suited to its environment. It was as if nature had experimented, adjusting, refining, adapting. He wrote in his private notebook, "One species does change into another." It was a shocking thought in an age when most people believed every creature was fixed since creation. He didn't dare share it yet. In 1839, Darwin married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. She was kind, thoughtful, and deeply religious, a woman of faith who loved her husband's gentle spirit, even when she didn't fully understand his science. Their marriage was one of quiet devotion. Together they had 10 children, though tragedy would later visit their home. In their early years, Darwin and Emma moved to the countryside, settling in a place called Down House, where the natural world surrounded them. Meadows, gardens, and winding paths that became his daily refuge. At Down House, Darwin began a new rhythm of life. Every morning he would walk his thinking path, a circular trail shaded by trees, while turning ideas over in his mind. He studied pigeons, worms, and barnacles for years, observing the smallest variations among them. To many, it looked like obsessive curiosity, but Darwin was building a foundation of evidence. He wanted to understand how tiny differences could, over immense time, lead to entirely new forms of life. The years passed in quiet work. He rarely travelled, and his health was fragile, often troubled by stomach pains and exhaustion. Some say his constant anxiety about his ideas made him ill, yet he persisted, writing thousands of pages of notes filled with calm precision. His studies were not driven by ambition, but by an inner need to make sense of the living world. In the stillness of his study, surrounded by the ticking of a clock and the rustle of paper, Darwin's great idea was slowly forming into something clear, an invisible force that guided life, shaping it without plan or intention. He didn't yet call it natural selection, but he could feel its logic emerging, soft as the turning of seasons. And though he still kept his theory secret, he knew that one day it would have to step into the light. By the early 1840s, Darwin's ideas had grown too large to remain private. His notebooks now carried hundreds of pages filled with evidence and speculation. Yet he hesitated to share them, sensing the storm they might bring. England was a deeply religious nation, and to suggest that humans shared ancestry with animals would not just shock, it would offend. Still, in quiet moments at Down House, while his children played in the garden, he knew he was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. He began drafting a short essay that outlined his main idea, that species were not created in their final form, but had evolved over time through a process of natural selection. To test his theory, Darwin turned his attention to the ordinary creatures around him. Pigeons became his first great experiment. Breeders had already created dozens of varieties by choosing which birds to mate. Some had long tails, others strange colours or curved beaks. Darwin realised that what the breeders did by choice, nature did by necessity. In the wild, only those individuals best suited to their environment survived long enough to pass on their traits. Over time, those tiny advantages could reshape an entire species. He wrote in his journal, "Nature selects, man only chooses." It was a simple, elegant truth hidden in plain sight. Yet Darwin was not ready to publish. His health remained weak, and the moral weight of his theory pressed on him. He feared it might disturb his wife's faith or bring ridicule from the church. So he continued to collect facts, determined to make his case unshakable before revealing it to the world. His life became a balance between science and silence. He tended his garden, played with his children, and read aloud to Emma in the evenings, but his thoughts always returned to the invisible workings of life. The death of his beloved daughter Annie in 1851 struck him deeply. She was only 10, full of laughter and light, and her illness tore something open in him. Darwin's belief in a benevolent order of creation began to fade. In the face of her loss, he saw how nature could be both beautiful and indifferent. He began to understand that suffering and death were not failures of design, but part of the same process that allowed life to adapt and endure. Evolution, he realized, was not cruel. It was simply real. By the mid-1850s, Darwin's private notes had grown into a mountain of evidence. He studied barnacles for 8 years, examining their variations under a microscope until his eyes ached. He observed earthworms, noting how their simple behaviour shaped the soil itself. Every small discovery added weight to his argument. He saw nature as an endless web of connections, each thread influencing another, life responding to life in a dance that had no single author. Then, in 1858, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from Alfred Russel Wallace, a young naturalist exploring the jungles of the Malay archipelago. To Darwin's astonishment, Wallace had independently developed the same theory of natural selection. The coincidence was stunning and terrifying. For more than 20 years, Darwin had worked in private, and now someone else had reached the same conclusion. His hands trembled as he read Wallace's words. Rather than compete, Darwin chose humility. With the help of his friends Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, both men's papers were presented together to the Linnean Society of London that same year. Darwin's long silence had ended. He finally realised that the idea no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth itself. In that quiet moment, his life's purpose became clear: to finish the great book he had always been meant to write. In the months following the presentation at the Linnean Society, Darwin worked with quiet intensity. He knew time was short and that the idea he had guarded for so many years now needed to live beyond him. The result of that urgency was a book that would soon change the world, On the Origin of Species. He began writing it in July 1858, surrounded by piles of notes and specimens, the hum of the countryside drifting through the open windows of Down House. Every morning, despite fragile health, he sat at his desk and wrote with calm determination. His handwriting was small and careful, his tone measured. He was not trying to shock or provoke. He was trying to explain. Darwin filled the pages with examples from nature: pigeons, finches, coral reefs, and fossils. He described how species slowly diverged over countless generations, how struggle and survival shaped their forms. Yet he avoided direct mention of humans. He knew the implication was obvious, but he chose patience over confrontation. Instead, he wrote of endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, that had evolved through natural laws rather than sudden creation. His argument was both simple and profound. In every generation, individuals vary. Some variations help them survive better than others. Those that survive pass their traits to offspring, while the less suited gradually disappear. Over immense stretches of time, these tiny invisible choices by nature give rise to the vast diversity of life. It was a vision of creation not as an instant miracle, but as a slow, elegant unfolding. When On the Origin of Species was published on November 24th, 1859, it sold out on the first day. The scientific world was shaken. Some praised its clarity, others condemned it as heresy. Newspapers printed cartoons of Darwin as an ape, and clergy denounced the idea that humans could share ancestry with animals. But even the harshest critics could not ignore the strength of his evidence. He had not merely speculated, he had demonstrated. In the weeks after publication, letters poured in. Some were furious, others full of wonder. Among his friends, the reaction was deeply mixed. Lyell, though cautious, began to see the beauty of the idea he had once doubted. Thomas Huxley, a fiery young biologist, became Darwin's most passionate defender. Huxley famously declared, "I would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who uses his intellect to obscure the truth." Darwin, however, avoided public debates. He disliked confrontation and preferred his quiet study to the noise of controversy. "I care not for fame," he once wrote, "only that the truth be known." While his supporters argued in lecture halls and newspapers, he continued his work, expanding his research into plants, worms, and human emotions. His purpose was no longer to convince, but to understand more deeply the fabric of life itself. Over time, On the Origin of Species began to change minds. Slowly, scientists and thinkers started to see the world as Darwin had seen it, interconnected, dynamic, alive with change. What had once seemed fixed now appeared fluid. The idea of evolution spread beyond biology, influencing philosophy, art, and even religion. Yet through all the turbulence, Darwin remained the same gentle observer he had always been. He still walked the same garden paths, still studied the slow turning of worms in the soil, still marvelled at the beauty of ordinary life. He once told a friend, "I feel most at peace when I am simply watching." For a man who had explained life's secret, that quiet humility was perhaps his greatest truth of all. As the years unfolded after on the origin of species, Darwin's influence grew quietly but steadily. What had begun as a scientific hypothesis was now transforming into a new way of seeing the world. Scientists across Europe began testing his ideas, finding evidence in fossils, breeding experiments, and the patterns of life across continents. Still, controversy followed him like a shadow. To many, his theory seemed to strip humanity of its divine uniqueness, reducing people to another branch on the tree of life. But Darwin himself never saw it that way. He saw unity, not degradation. To him, the fact that all living beings shared ancestry was something deeply beautiful, a story of connection rather than separation. Despite his fame, Darwin's life at Down House remained modest and predictable. He rose early, worked for several hours in his study, then walked his sandwalk path, lost in thought. His children often joined him, running through the fields while he quietly spoke his notes aloud. After lunch, he rested, read letters, or conducted small experiments in his greenhouse. Evenings were spent by the fire with Emma, reading aloud or playing cards. The rhythm was simple, and he cherished it. "A man's home," he once said, "is the best laboratory of all." He continued to publish book after book, each exploring a different facet of life. The variation of animals and plants under domestication delved deeper into how breeding mirrored nature's slow selection. The Descent of Man finally addressed what he had avoided in Origin, the evolution of humans themselves. He argued that mankind was not separate from the rest of creation, but part of the same grand process. This idea, though gentle in tone, struck like thunder across Victorian society. To suggest that humans and apes shared ancestors challenged everything people thought they knew about their place in the world. Yet Darwin's writing was calm, almost fatherly, as if inviting readers to see not offence but wonder. Critics continued to mock him. Caricatures appeared in newspapers, showing him with a monkey's body and a human face. Some called him dangerous, others a genius. But Darwin paid little attention. His health worsened year by year. Heart problems, stomach pain, endless fatigue. Still, every morning he returned to his desk. The act of thinking, of quietly tracing the invisible laws of life, gave him purpose and peace. He was not a revolutionary shouting in the streets. He was a patient gardener of ideas, and his garden, both literal and intellectual, flourished. Visitors came from around the world to meet the kind old man whose mind had reshaped science. They found not an arrogant scholar, but a humble listener who spoke softly, smiled often, and preferred to talk about worms and flowers rather than fame. Darwin once wrote to a friend, "There is grandeur in this view of life." That line would later close on the origin of species, but it also captured the essence of his spirit. For him, the grandeur lay in simplicity, in seeing that every leaf, bird, and human was part of the same unfolding story written by time. As the 1870s passed, Darwin became a symbol of a new scientific age, though he never sought the title. His focus remained on the small, the ordinary, the overlooked. To him, even the turning of soil by worms revealed the quiet persistence of life. And through those small observations, he continued to reveal what many had missed, that evolution was not chaos, but harmony, not an argument against beauty, but a deeper understanding of it. By the late 1870s, Charles Darwin had become one of the most respected men in the world, though he lived as quietly as ever. Scientists, students, and travellers wrote to him daily, eager for advice or simply to thank him. His answers were always kind and thoughtful. He had no desire to build a following or claim authority. He only wished that others would observe, think, and question for themselves. He believed truth belonged to no single person, but to everyone who sought it with patience. His home at Down House remained his sanctuary. The gardens overflowed with wildflowers, and the air was filled with birdsong. He often sat outside with a notebook, watching bees move between blossoms. Those tiny journeys fascinated him as much as any grand theory. He noted how each bee's behaviour contributed to the survival of the hive, another example of how small acts could shape great outcomes. Even late in life, his sense of wonder never faded. Darwin's last major works continued to surprise the public. In the expression of the emotions in man and animals, he explored how feelings, fear, joy, anger, love, appeared across species. He argued that emotions were not gifts of reason or civilization, but ancient signals shared by all living beings. A smile, a frown, a shiver of fear, each was a universal language older than words. The idea softened his image in the eyes of some critics. They began to see that Darwin's science was not cold or mechanical, but deeply human. He had shown that even our most personal experiences were threads in the fabric of evolution. His fascination with the ordinary continued with his final book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms. It was a study of earthworms, how they eat, move, and shape the soil. Many were puzzled that the man who had explained the origin of species would end his life writing about worms. But to Darwin, there was poetry in it. Worms, he realized, quietly transformed the earth, turning decay into renewal. It may be doubted, he wrote, whether there are many other animals which have played so important a part in the history of the world. In his later years, Darwin's body grew weaker, yet his curiosity stayed bright. He often worked from his armchair, reading scientific journals and exchanging letters with researchers around the world. He took comfort in seeing new generations of thinkers expand upon his work, adding evidence and clarity he could never have imagined. To him, progress was a collective effort, an evolution of thought itself. When asked if he still believed in God, Darwin always answered gently. He said he could not be certain of anything beyond the natural world, but he felt no anger toward faith. "I have never denied the existence of God," he once wrote, "but I see no proof of it either." His tone was never confrontational. It was simply honest, born of reflection and humility. In his garden, surrounded by the quiet hum of life, Darwin often thought about how far he had come from the curious boy chasing beetles. He had travelled oceans, questioned everything, and changed the world's understanding of life. Yet he felt no pride, only gratitude, for the beauty of nature, for the patience of time, and for the endless mystery that remained. In the spring of 1882, Charles Darwin's strength began to fade. He was 73, his body frail but his mind still alert. Each morning he tried to keep his habits, reading letters, jotting notes, walking a few steps in his garden. Yet even those simple routines now exhausted him. Emma watched over him tenderly, ensuring his days remained peaceful. Their love, calm and constant, had carried them through decades of triumphs and losses. Now, in the stillness of Down House, that love became his final comfort. Visitors continued to arrive, some travelling from distant countries just to meet him. They found an old man with gentle eyes, humble and kind. He spoke little about fame or discovery. When praised for changing science, he smiled softly and said, "If I have done good service, it was by patience and observation." To Darwin, the truth had never been about glory. It was about understanding the quiet perfection of life itself. As his illness worsened, he spent more time near the window, watching the garden that had been his companion for 40 years. The same trees he had once studied now seemed to him like old friends. He marvelled at how the seasons continued, each one a reminder of nature's endless rhythm. Evolution, he realized, was not only a scientific process but a reflection of existence itself. Birth, change, decay, renewal. Life, always finding a way to continue. On April 19th, 1882, Charles Darwin passed away peacefully at Down House, surrounded by his family. The news spread across the world within days. Scientists, poets, and ordinary people mourned a man whose work had reshaped the human story. The government offered his family a rare honour, burial in Westminster Abbey, near Isaac Newton. Though Darwin had lived quietly, his death placed him among the giants of human thought. The ceremony was simple, no grand speeches, no fanfare, just the sound of footsteps echoing through the old stone halls as his coffin was lowered into the ground. In that moment, the man who had once feared to publish his ideas was laid to rest among kings and philosophers. His journey, from a curious child in Shrewsbury to the discoverer of nature's deepest secret, had come full circle. After his passing, Emma returned often to his study. The papers remained where he had left them, the chair by the window still facing the garden. She said it felt as if he might walk in at any moment, notebook in hand, and perhaps, in some way, he never truly left. His presence lingered in the air, the calm, searching spirit of a man who had spent his life listening to nature's whisper. Today, Darwin's theory of evolution stands as one of the cornerstones of modern science. From genetics to ecology, his ideas continue to guide discovery. Yet beyond the facts and evidence, his legacy is also philosophical. He taught that life is not about perfection or competition alone, but adaptation, about the quiet strength to change and endure. In his final note, Darwin once wrote, "There is grandeur in this view of life." Those words remain his gift to the world, a reminder that beneath the surface of every living thing lies the same quiet miracle of becoming. Long after Darwin's passing, his influence continued to ripple through generations. The 19th century gave way to the 20th, and scientists began to uncover the details he could only imagine. In 1900, researchers rediscovered the genetic work of Gregor Mendel, the monk who had studied pea plants and found the basic laws of inheritance. Suddenly, Darwin's theory of natural selection had its missing piece, the mechanism of heredity. What Darwin had sensed through observation, genetics now confirmed through data. The invisible became visible. As laboratories grew and microscopes improved, scientists found that life's code was written inside every cell. The discovery of DNA in the mid-20th century revealed how traits passed from parent to offspring, how tiny mutations created diversity, and how nature's slow selection shaped entire species. The double helix, that elegant spiral of information, was the physical proof of Darwin's invisible law. His idea had not only survived, it had deepened. Yet even as science advanced, debate persisted. Some still resisted evolution, not from evidence, but from fear that it diminished the human spirit. But Darwin's vision had never been about diminishing. He had seen in nature not randomness, but a subtle harmony. Life, in all its forms, was bound together by time and transformation. To him, that was not a reason for despair. It was a reason for awe. In classrooms, his name became a symbol of curiosity. Teachers told stories of the young naturalist aboard the Beagle, the man who stared at finches and saw the pattern of life. Museums built grand exhibits of fossils and models showing how whales, birds, and humans shared distant ancestors. Children looked up at the branching tree of life, tracing how every species was connected through billions of years. Artists and writers too drew inspiration from Darwin. Painters explored the beauty of evolution's slow artistry. Poets found meaning in the idea that life itself was a continuous act of creation. Even philosophers took his ideas beyond biology, using them to understand society's behaviour and the nature of progress. Evolution became not just a scientific truth, but a metaphor for all growth, for the slow, steady unfolding of human thought. Over time, the harsh controversies softened. The world began to see Darwin not as a destroyer of faith, but as a seeker of truth. In his modest way, he had reminded humanity of its place within nature, not above it. He had shown that understanding the laws of life did not erase wonder, it deepened it. The mystery of existence had not vanished, it had become more profound. At Down House, his old home became a museum, preserved as it had been in his lifetime. Visitors walked the sandpath where he had once thought and dreamed, the same quiet trail under the trees. His notebooks and letters remained there, yellowed by time, each line filled with patience and clarity. Standing in that space, one could almost feel his presence, a calm whisper of curiosity echoing through the air. More than a century later, Darwin's legacy still guides us. Every discovery in biology, every genetic sequence, every study of ecosystems carries his spirit. His message endures, that life is not fixed but ever-changing, not chaotic but endlessly creative. And through that understanding we glimpse something larger than ourselves, the grand, continuous miracle of life evolving in silence. More than a century after Darwin's death, the world he helped to explain has grown even more intricate and astonishing. The mysteries of life that once seemed impossible to comprehend are now illuminated by microscopes, satellites, and computers. Yet at the heart of every discovery, Darwin's quiet idea still beats. The tree of life he once sketched in a notebook has expanded into a vast digital map, tracing the ancestry of millions of species. From bacteria in the deep sea to the human mind itself, all living things share one continuous thread of existence. In the 21st century, geneticists decoded the human genome, the complete sequence of DNA that makes us who we are. It was a modern echo of Darwin's insight, that the differences between species are not barriers but variations on a shared design. Every human being, regardless of race or origin, carries within them the same code that links back to the first spark of life. Evolution, once controversial, has become the foundation for medicine, agriculture, and conservation. We use it to understand diseases, to preserve endangered species, to trace the migrations of our ancestors. Darwin's theory, born from the waves and islands of the Beagle, now guides satellites and laboratories. Yet for all its precision, science still carries the humility Darwin embodied. He never claimed to have all the answers, he only showed us how to ask better questions. In a world of endless data, his spirit remains as a reminder to observe with patience, to wonder without arrogance. Every living cell, every fossil, every shifting ecosystem tells the same quiet story, that life is not a fixed masterpiece but an ever-changing symphony, composed by time itself. The image of Darwin, the bearded man with calm eyes, has become a symbol of curiosity. Statues of him stand in universities and museums, not as monuments to certainty but to exploration. Students who study biology still read his words, still feel the echo of that first voyage across the world. Many realize, as Darwin did, that discovery is not a sudden moment of revelation, but a slow awakening, the art of noticing what has always been there. If Darwin could see the world today, the photographs of galaxies, the deep-sea creatures glowing in darkness, the genetic blueprints of ancient humans, he might smile quietly, not in pride, but in recognition. He would see that the journey he began has no end, that knowledge, like life, continues to evolve. Still, some truths remain untouched by time. The earth turns, species rise and fall, and nature continues its endless experiment. From the smallest seed to the largest whale, from the fleeting spark of an insect's life to the vast span of human history, all are threads woven into the same fabric. Darwin once wrote that, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been, and are being, evolved. Those words still resonate, not as an ending, but as a beginning. They remind us that understanding life does not take away its mystery, it deepens it. And so, the story of Charles Darwin is not only the story of one man, but of life itself, ever curious, ever changing, quietly moving forward beneath the light of time. When people today think of Darwin, they often imagine the scientist as an icon, a face carved in stone, a name in textbooks. But during his lifetime, Darwin was never that kind of man. He disliked attention, disliked conflict, and preferred quiet corners to crowded halls. He once said he was a complete coward in public speaking, and he meant it. Yet from those gentle habits emerged an idea bold enough to transform how humanity saw itself. His genius was not in his ego, but in his patience. in the slow, steady art of watching. After On the Origin of Species, Darwin often reflected on how accidental his discoveries seemed. He admitted that he never set out to change the world. He only wanted to understand why things were as they were, why certain plants thrived while others vanished, why one bird's beak differed from another's. He found beauty in small questions, never realizing they would lead to answers vast enough to shake centuries of belief. "I am," he once wrote, "a very ordinary man with more than ordinary curiosity." That humility became the secret of his greatness. Darwin did not see nature as a competition of strength alone. He saw cooperation, adaptation, and balance. He saw that survival was not about power, but about harmony between a creature and its surroundings. That perspective has shaped not only biology but modern ecology, reminding us that life flourishes through connection, not domination. In a sense, Darwin was one of the first thinkers to show that nature's wisdom lies in unity. Beyond science, his story holds a quiet lesson about perseverance. The theory of evolution took him more than 20 years to complete, 2 decades of observation, writing, doubt, and revision. In those years, he battled illness, grief, and fear of rejection. Yet he never gave up. His progress was never loud. It was slow, like the very process he studied. Evolution itself became a reflection of his character. Gentle, persistent, unstoppable. Darwin's letters reveal a deeply kind man. He wrote tenderly to his children, thanking them for collecting worms or helping him with small experiments. He corresponded with scientists around the world, always generous with praise. Even when he disagreed, he never attacked. He reasoned calmly, as if truth was something to be uncovered together. His empathy reached even beyond humans. He often spoke of the suffering of animals with genuine sorrow. He believed that sensitivity to life was not weakness, but strength. In the last decade of his life, as his beard turned white and his hands trembled with age, Darwin still marvelled at the natural world. He once said that to truly see a flower bloom or a bird take flight was to witness a miracle, not one imposed from above, but one unfolding within the laws of nature. For him, beauty did not need mystery to exist. It was already miraculous in its simplicity. Today, that same spirit continues in every scientist, explorer, and dreamer who asks why, and waits patiently for an answer. Darwin's story endures not because he solved everything, but because he showed us that knowledge itself evolves, that the act of questioning is the essence of life. And so, when we look back at the man who explained life's secret, we don't just see a scientist. We see a listener, a gardener, a father, and a believer in the quiet power of observation, proof that sometimes the deepest revolutions begin in silence. More than any book or theory, it was Darwin's way of thinking that changed the world. He approached nature not as a battlefield, but as a conversation, patient, balanced, endlessly unfolding. In his notebooks, he once wrote, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." That idea became one of the guiding truths of modern life. It applies not only to animals or plants, but to everything humanity creates, from societies and art to technology and belief. The ability to adapt, to grow, to let go of old forms and allow new ones to emerge, that is evolution's silent wisdom. After his death, Darwin's family preserved his letters, drawings, and notebooks. Reading them today feels like stepping into the quiet rhythm of his mind. His handwriting is careful, his language precise, yet behind every sentence lies warmth. He was never writing for fame, he was writing to understand. Many of his private notes end with small reflections, almost poetic, thoughts about beauty, humility, or gratitude. In one, he wrote, "To think of the endless generations of life before me, and those that shall come after, fills me with awe, not fear." For him, science and wonder were not opposites, they were two sides of the same truth. As the decades passed, the world began to embrace his vision. Scientists expanded upon his theory, finding evidence in fossils, genes, and the behaviour of species. But others took his ideas further than he ever intended, twisting survival of the fittest into a justification for cruelty, politics, or war. Those distortions would have broken his heart. Darwin's original message was never about domination. It was about balance, cooperation, and adaptation. He believed that empathy and intelligence were also products of evolution, essential for the survival of humankind. In the 20th century, the theory of evolution united with the science of genetics, creating what is now known as the modern synthesis. It confirmed beyond doubt what Darwin had only suspected, that every living thing carries traces of its ancestors, written in the code of DNA. From single-celled organisms to human beings, life is connected by a thread of continuity stretching back billions of years. Each heartbeat, each breath, each thought is part of that unbroken chain. And yet, for all the advances, the mystery of life remains as deep as ever. The more science reveals, the more infinite it seems. Darwin himself would have smiled at this, the idea that discovery never ends, that every answer opens new questions. He once wrote that ignorance more than knowledge begets confidence, meaning that true wisdom comes from humility, not pride. Today, standing beneath the vastness of the stars, we can see ourselves as Darwin did, small but part of something immense. Every species that walks, swims, or flies is bound by the same gentle law of change. Life, in its simplest and grandest forms, continues its slow dance through time. In that sense, Darwin's theory was not only scientific but spiritual, not in a religious way, but in its reverence for existence itself. It reminds us that to live is to change, and to change is to live. And as long as life endures, his quiet truth endures with it, carried forward on the breath of every living thing. As the new century unfolded, Darwin's legacy became the foundation of a new worldview. The simple, patient observations of one man had turned into a universal lens through which humanity began to understand itself. His ideas reached beyond biology, influencing psychology, philosophy, and even art. The notion that everything evolves, minds, cultures, emotions, reshaped how people thought about progress and creativity. It wasn't just species that changed. Entire ways of seeing the world were now understood as living, breathing systems, adapting with time. In schools and universities, students learned to see connections where earlier generations had seen separation. The old boundaries between man and nature began to fade. A leaf, a human hand, a bird's wing, all became symbols of shared origin. To Darwin, that unity had always been the most beautiful part of the story. He wrote that when we study nature deeply, we feel as though we are looking into a mirror, and there we see ourselves. The more humanity learned about evolution, the more it discovered humility, a quiet recognition that we are not masters of the earth, but participants in its great unfolding. In the century that followed, great minds expanded Darwin's vision. Scientists discovered how life began to form on the early Earth, how single-celled organisms cooperated to create complex beings, how intelligence itself evolved through communication and empathy. From apes came art, from survival came morality, from instinct came reflection. The same process that shaped wings and eyes also shaped thought and emotion. The human capacity for love, creativity, and compassion is not something apart from nature. It is nature, refined through countless generations of adaptation. Artists found in evolution a metaphor for transformation. Writers spoke of ideas evolving like species, growing, merging, or disappearing. Architects, musicians, and inventors borrowed Darwin's rhythm. Progress through variation, through trial and error. Even language itself is an evolving organism shaped by need, time, and contact. The spirit of Darwin's thought became woven into the fabric of modern culture. Yet despite his vast impact, Darwin's personal image remained gentle, almost fragile. The man who listened more than he spoke. His study at Down House, preserved through the years, reveals the simplicity of his life. A wooden desk, well-worn books, a magnifying glass resting beside notes written in small, careful lines. It is hard to imagine that from such modest surroundings came an idea so vast it would rewrite humanity's understanding of existence. Today, when scientists map the cosmos or study the smallest cell, they continue his method: to observe, to question, to doubt, to wait. That patience is the true legacy of Darwin. He taught that knowledge is not built in leaps, but in steps, in details so small they might seem invisible, yet together they form the shape of truth. In this way, Darwin's story reminds us of something profoundly simple: that progress is never sudden, that greatness often comes quietly, and that the act of noticing, of really seeing, may be the most revolutionary thing a human being can do. Darwin's influence quietly reached corners of human thought that he never could have predicted. In psychology, thinkers began to explore how emotions, instincts, and even dreams might have evolved to help the mind survive and adapt. The work of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and William James all carried echoes of Darwin's idea that nothing in human nature appears by accident. Each feeling, fear, or desire is the result of ancient patterns shaped through time. Even compassion, Darwin believed, was a product of evolution, an instinct that allowed communities to endure together rather than alone. In philosophy, his work forced humanity to re-examine the meaning of morality and purpose. If nature followed no grand plan, what then gave life its meaning? For some, this realization was frightening. For others, it was liberating. Darwin's universe was not cold or empty. It was alive, full of possibility. Life did not need to be pre-written to be beautiful. Its meaning was found in the miracle of existence itself, in the endless striving of every living thing to adapt, survive, and grow. Darwin's ideas also inspired a new wave of explorers who sought to trace the deep past of humanity. Archaeologists unearthed fossils that confirmed his predictions, revealing creatures that bridged the gap between ancient apes and modern humans. Each discovery extended the timeline of life further into the unknown. The Earth, once thought to be a few thousand years old, was now understood to be billions. Humanity's story had expanded beyond imagination, and yet, within that vastness, Darwin's insight gave it coherence, a thread connecting everything from the first cell to modern civilization. The influence reached even the spiritual world. Some theologians began to see evolution not as a contradiction to faith, but as its complement. If life evolved through natural laws, perhaps those laws themselves were sacred, an expression of divine creativity working slowly, patiently, through time. The idea that science and spirituality could coexist was one Darwin himself might have appreciated. Though he called himself agnostic in later years, he never lost his reverence for nature. His sense of wonder was, in many ways, a kind of prayer. As technology advanced, his ideas found new meaning. Computers and artificial intelligence began to mimic the very principles he had described: selection, adaptation, variation. Evolution was no longer confined to biology. It had become a universal algorithm, shaping ideas, systems, and even digital life. The same natural logic that once guided finches now guided machines. Darwin's seed of thought had evolved once more, and yet, for all its complexity, his theory remains simple at its heart. Change is constant, and through that change, life persists. It is a truth both humbling and hopeful. In every transformation, in every loss or adaptation, something continues. The rhythm of survival that began billions of years ago and still whispers in every heartbeat today. To study Darwin is to look not just backward in time, but inward, to recognize that we too are products of that same patient process, shaped by chance, guided by need, and connected to every living thing that ever was or ever will be. In the quiet years that followed Darwin's passing, his children and grandchildren carried his legacy forward in their own ways. The Darwin family became known not only for science, but for compassion, creativity, and curiosity, the very qualities he valued most. His son Francis continued his botanical studies, editing his father's papers and publishing his letters so the world could see the gentle humanity behind the great theory. Other descendants became artists, musicians, doctors, and thinkers, each carrying some reflection of the man who had taught them to look closely and think deeply. The name Darwin came to symbolize not only evolution, but the enduring spirit of inquiry. Around the world, monuments began to appear, statues, libraries, and schools honoring his work. Yet perhaps the greatest monument was invisible, the shift in human perspective. Before Darwin, people often saw life as a static hierarchy, with humans placed above nature. After him, the world began to see itself as part of a continuous whole. The wall between humanity and the rest of creation had quietly dissolved. In the decades that followed, scientists explored every corner of the natural world through Darwin's lens. They studied how ecosystems evolved, how cooperation could be as powerful as competition, how extinction shaped the birth of new species. The study of evolution became a bridge between disciplines, linking biology with chemistry, geology, and even cosmology. It revealed that change was not limited to life alone, but was the law of the universe itself. The idea of natural selection also began to influence how people thought about society. Some thinkers misused it, coining terms like social Darwinism to justify inequality or conquest, ideas Darwin himself never supported. He had spoken often of kindness and moral responsibility, believing that empathy was as vital to human progress as intelligence. The misuse of his words became one of the darker chapters of his legacy, a reminder that even truth can be distorted when ambition overrides understanding. Still, the heart of his vision survived, that all living things are connected by ancestry and adaptation. As environmental awareness grew in the 20th century, Darwin's message gained new urgency. Scientists and conservationists realized that understanding evolution was also the key to protecting it. To preserve life meant to respect its fragile balance, the very harmony Darwin had spent his life studying. Standing today in his study at Down House, one can imagine him still there, quietly turning the pages of a journal, pausing to observe a leaf or an insect on the window. The air carries the same stillness he loved. Outside, the paths where he once walked remain lined with trees, their roots deep in the same soil he tended. It is a living museum of patience, reminding visitors that discovery begins not with noise, but with attention. Darwin's greatest gift was not a set of facts, but a way of seeing, a gentle invitation to look closer, to accept uncertainty, and to find wonder in the ordinary. His life proved that truth, like nature, does not arrive all at once. It grows quietly, unfolding over time, until one day it changes everything. By the mid-20th century, Darwin's once radical vision had become the foundation of modern science. Biology, genetics, and even astronomy built upon his understanding that the universe itself is an evolving system. Every new discovery, from DNA to distant galaxies, seemed to echo his belief that change is the engine of existence. In classrooms, children learned about evolution not as controversy, but as common sense, a story that united every creature on Earth. Yet behind that vast intellectual structure still stood the image of one man, quietly writing in his garden, sketching a tree that explained the history of life. The modern synthesis of the 1930s and 40s fused Darwin's natural selection with Mendel's genetics, showing that evolution was not random chaos, but an elegant balance of chance and law. Small mutations in genes created variation. The environment decided which survived. Over generations, this invisible dance shaped everything from butterflies to whales. Darwin could not have known the word gene. yet his intuition had been right. He had glimpsed a truth so deep that it would take a century of microscopes and mathematics to describe. As technology advanced, evolution became visible in real time. Scientists watched bacteria develop resistance to antibiotics, finches on the Galapagos change beak shapes within decades, and viruses mutate across seasons. Life was still evolving before human eyes. What Darwin saw in fossils, modern researchers saw in petri dishes. It was proof that the story of creation had never ended. It was still being written, every day, in every cell. Meanwhile, philosophers and writers found new meaning in his work. They saw evolution not as a threat to humanity's dignity, but as a call to humility. If we are part of nature, then our choices matter deeply. The survival of other species is tied to our own. Environmental movements around the world adopted Darwin's view of interconnection. Protecting a forest or a coral reef was no longer just about saving beauty. It was about preserving the ancient web of life that had shaped us all. In art and literature, Darwin's influence stretched quietly across generations. From modernist poets to filmmakers, creators drew on the idea that life and art evolved together, improvised, imperfect, endlessly adapting. The principle of variation became a metaphor for creativity itself. By the time humans first stepped onto the moon, Darwin's seed of thought had grown into a global worldview. From that silent grey surface, astronauts looked back at Earth, a small living planet, fragile and bright, and saw the unity he had described long before spaceflight existed. In that blue sphere, they saw the same truth Darwin had written with ink and patience, that all life is one family, bound by time, forever changing, forever connected. As the modern world raced forward, Darwin's quiet philosophy of observation seemed almost old-fashioned, yet it became more necessary than ever. Technology grew faster than evolution itself. Machines began to mimic the very processes he had once described in nature. Scientists studying artificial intelligence used words like selection, adaptation, and mutation to describe how algorithms learned. It was as if the principles that shaped life had begun to echo in silicon and code. Darwin's theory had slipped beyond biology. It had become a pattern of existence itself. Still, amid this acceleration, his lessons about patience and humility remained timeless. Darwin had taught that great change comes not from haste, but from small, steady improvements built over time. Nature doesn't rush, it refines. His life was proof that quiet curiosity can alter history more than noise or ambition. In a century obsessed with speed, his story reminded humanity to slow down, to watch, to listen. As climate change began reshaping the planet, Darwin's writings gained new urgency. His descriptions of ecosystems, the delicate links between soil, water, insects and birds, read now like prophecy. He had shown that when one part of nature is disturbed, all others feel the effect. We can never touch one thread, he once wrote, without shaking the whole web. That web, fragile yet resilient, is what sustains the Earth. Modern conservation efforts owe much to this awareness. Every national park, every protected species, every reforestation project echoes Darwin's call to respect the balance of life. Yet Darwin himself never imagined he would become a symbol. He remained, even in memory, a man of quiet habits and deep compassion. In his letters, he worried not about fame, but about the welfare of animals, the kindness of people, the education of children. He once wrote that the greatest moral duty of humankind was to extend our sympathies beyond the narrow circle of man. Those words now sound prophetic in an age when the future of countless species depends on human care. In popular culture, his image softened over time. Movies, novels, and art portrayed him not as a stern scientist, but as a dreamer surrounded by notebooks and nature. The old man with the beard became an icon of curiosity itself, proof that one person, quietly seeking truth, could change the world. His theory, once considered dangerous, was now celebrated as one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. At Down House, his study remains filled with the objects of that journey: preserved insects, notebooks, the worn armchair where he once sat in thought. Tourists walk the same sand path where he walked each day, circling slowly beneath the trees. The rhythm of his footsteps lives on in the silence of that place, a reminder that discovery begins not with answers, but with wonder. And so, even in the digital age, Darwin's legacy continues to evolve. His idea that life adapts, survives and renews applies not just to biology, but to civilization itself. In every act of curiosity, in every moment of patience, the same spirit endures, the belief that the world is not finished, and that understanding it begins with simply looking closer. More than a century and a half after On the Origin of Species, the echo of Darwin's discovery still shapes how humanity understands life. Every field of science, from medicine to astronomy, now carries his influence. The study of viruses, for example, follows the logic he once traced among finches and tortoises: how small variations decide survival. When a new disease emerges and mutates, it is Darwin's invisible hand we recognise at work. Even the development of the human mind, the way ideas spread and compete, follows patterns of evolution. His theory has become not only biological, but universal, a blueprint of change itself. Yet Darwin's spirit of inquiry was never about domination or control. He looked at nature with respect, even tenderness. He once wrote that to study life is to walk in a temple built without hands. He saw science not as a conquest, but as participation in something larger, a quiet conversation with the universe. That humility is what keeps his work alive long after his time. It reminds us that curiosity and reverence can coexist, that truth and beauty often grow from the same root. In the modern era, as humans alter the planet faster than any natural force, Darwin's message feels newly relevant. He showed that adaptation is survival, but also that extinction follows imbalance. Species that cannot adjust to change vanish. Those that evolve endure. The same is true for humanity. To ignore the rhythms of nature is to forget where we came from. To learn from them is to ensure that life continues. Environmental movements around the world often quote him without realizing it. When people speak of the interconnected web of life, they echo his vision. When ecologists restore forests or protect coral reefs, they act on his understanding that every creature plays a part in the whole. Even modern climate science, with its models of ecosystems and adaptation, flows from his early insights. The Earth, he would have said, is not a collection of parts, but a single living system. Beyond science, Darwin's influence reached the human heart. He taught that beauty lies in imperfection, in the slow unfolding of time. He found meaning not in permanence, but in transformation. For him, the struggle of life was not tragedy. It was proof of resilience. Every creature, from the smallest worm to humankind itself, carries within it the story of survival, of endless becoming. If Darwin were alive today, he might marvel at how far his ideas have travelled. He would see his principles in computer models, space exploration, and even art installations that trace the evolution of sound and colour. He might smile at how life continues to imitate its own law, forever adapting, forever curious. His theory began as a whisper written in ink, doubted, feared, and debated. Now it has become a shared truth that connects generations. And though the details of science evolve, the heart of his message remains: life is not static nor finished. It is a flowing continuum, delicate yet unstoppable, endlessly creating itself anew. As the 21st century deepened, Darwin's influence began to reach unexpected places, far beyond the boundaries of science. His idea of evolution found reflections in psychology, economics, and even digital culture. Social networks, information systems, and trends began to behave like ecosystems of their own. Ideas competed, adapted, and spread just like living organisms. A thought that resonated, survived, and multiplied, one that didn't quietly disappeared. It was as if Darwin's natural selection had evolved into cultural selection, where human creativity became the new environment shaping survival. Yet this new age also brought new challenges. Challenges Darwin could never have imagined. Humanity had become a force of evolution itself. Genetic engineering, cloning, and artificial intelligence allowed humans to alter the rules of life that once seemed sacred. Scientists could now edit DNA, blending the boundaries between natural and artificial creation. It raised questions both thrilling and unsettling. If life can be rewritten, does evolution still belong to nature? Would Darwin see this as progress, or as hubris? No one could say for certain, but his own words offered guidance. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than knowledge, he once warned. A reminder that wisdom must grow alongside power. Despite these transformations, the essence of his vision remains constant. Every discovery, no matter how advanced, still rests on the same foundation: observation, patience, and respect for complexity. Even as technology accelerates, the principles Darwin lived by, curiosity without arrogance, wonder without haste, remain timeless. His journey across oceans taught that understanding comes not from control, but from humility before the unknown. Around the world, his ideas continue to unite scientists and dreamers alike. Conservationists quote him when speaking of balance. Artists reference his sense of continuity, and philosophers use his insights to explore consciousness itself. The more humanity learns, the clearer it becomes that evolution is not a completed story. It is an ongoing conversation between life and its environment, and humans, for all their progress, are still participants within it, not authors above it. Darwin's portrait hangs in laboratories, museums, and classrooms, yet he would likely have smiled at the thought of being turned into an icon. He never sought fame or followers, he only sought truth. His power came not from declarations, but from questions. Small, persistent, careful questions that open the universe a little wider. In many ways, the digital age mirrors his method. Data replaces specimens, algorithms replace notebooks, but the pursuit is the same: to trace patterns hidden in complexity, to find simplicity within chaos. Darwin's legacy, then, is not just biological, it is intellectual and emotional. He taught the world how to think slowly, how to see deeply, how to listen to the quiet rhythm of change. And even now, as humanity faces the unknown future of evolution, whether natural, cultural, or technological, his message remains clear and steady: that every form of life, every idea, every spark of creation is part of the same vast, unfinished journey toward understanding. As the human story moves deeper into the digital age, Darwin's theory feels more alive than ever. The world he once studied with a magnifying glass can now be observed through satellites and genetic maps. Yet the pattern remains the same: life adapting, responding, renewing. In laboratories, scientists can now watch evolution unfold in real time. Bacteria mutate within days. Species shift their ranges as the climate changes. Genes reveal the ancient connections that bind all living things. Each new discovery only confirms what Darwin intuited from his voyage on the Beagle: that nature is not fixed, but forever in motion. Modern researchers call this the extended synthesis, the next chapter of evolutionary thought. It expands Darwin's work to include not just survival and reproduction, but also cooperation, symbiosis, and even culture. Species no longer evolve alone, they evolve together, influencing one another in complex webs of interaction. Forests communicate through fungal networks, whales pass knowledge across generations, and humans reshape their environment in ways that now reshape themselves. It is evolution as a dialogue, a living conversation among species and time. Yet even as science reaches for deeper truths, Darwin's original writings retain a kind of poetry. He saw in nature not only logic but emotion, the quiet tenderness of life persisting against the odds. In his notes he once wrote, "It is not the grandeur that moves me most, but the simplicity." That humility still speaks to scientists today. Behind every genome sequenced, every fossil uncovered, there remains a sense of awe that data alone cannot explain. In education, his name endures not just as a chapter in biology, but as a lesson in thought itself. Students studying his notebooks see how great ideas are born, not in moments of lightning inspiration, but in slow, deliberate attention. They see a man who doubted, revised, hesitated, and grew. Darwin's journey teaches that curiosity is not a straight line, but a spiral, circling closer to truth with every question. Around the world, his ideas continue to inspire the protection of life in all its forms. Conservation programs, seed banks, and wildlife reserves are modern expressions of his belief in continuity. To study evolution is to see how precious diversity truly is, how easily it can vanish, and how miraculous it is that it exists at all. But perhaps the deepest part of Darwin's legacy is philosophical. His work reminds humanity that change is not something to fear. The universe itself evolves. Stars are born, die, and give their dust to new worlds. In that cosmic rhythm, we see the same pattern Darwin found in the smallest creatures: creation through transformation. If he could see us now, Darwin might feel both wonder and concern. He would marvel at the reach of human understanding, yet remind us to remain humble before nature's complexity. His quiet message, carried through centuries, still whispers in every discovery, that the secret of life is not control, but connection. The recognition that in every change life continues its patient, magnificent dance. In the centuries since Darwin's birth, the world has transformed beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet the essence of his discovery remains the compass guiding modern thought. Every field, from genetics to neuroscience, from ecology to artificial intelligence, still carries traces of his simple, radical insight that life is shaped by change, and that every difference, however small, carries meaning. His theory gave science its unifying language, allowing it to see all living beings not as separate creations, but as notes in a single, ongoing symphony. The beauty of Darwin's vision lies in its humility. He did not describe life as a struggle for domination, but as a balance between adaptation and cooperation. Even competition, in his view, produced harmony through diversity. The survival of species depended not only on strength, but on flexibility, interdependence, and chance. That perspective feels more urgent now than ever, as the planet faces crises Darwin could not have foreseen: climate change, habitat loss, and mass extinction. The same principle he discovered, adapt or perish, has become a warning to humanity itself. Scientists around the world continue to build upon his legacy, tracing evolution in everything from microbes to human culture. The study of genetics has revealed how closely related all species truly are. The difference between humans and chimpanzees, once a philosophical gulf, is now measured as a 1.2% variation in DNA. Even more astonishingly, our cells share molecular machinery with fungi, plants, and bacteria. The deeper science looks, the more it finds evidence of unity. Darwin's great tree of life, once just a sketch, has become a vast network mapped across genomes and time. Yet beyond science, Darwin's ideas have shaped how we understand ourselves. His work gave rise to a new sense of belonging, not to one tribe or nation, but to the earth itself. The realization that we are kin to every creature, that our breath mingles with the breath of forests and oceans, brings both humility and responsibility. We are no longer separate from nature, we are its continuation. In art and literature, this awareness inspired new forms of expression. Writers found poetry in the passage of time. Painters captured the quiet persistence of life. Composers echoed the rhythm of evolution in their music. Even today, Films, novels, and installations revisit Darwin's story, not as history, but as philosophy, a reminder that progress, beauty, and meaning all arise from transformation. Darwin's enduring relevance lies not in answers, but in questions. He taught the world that to ask why and how is itself an act of wonder. That truth continues to guide discovery. Whether scientists are decoding ancient DNA or exploring the origins of consciousness, they walk in his footsteps, not as disciples, but as companions in the same endless search. And through it all, the quiet message of his life endures, that the power of curiosity, patience, and humility can change the world more profoundly than force or fame. Darwin didn't conquer nature, he listened to it. And in that listening he revealed the most human secret of all. That understanding begins with reverence for the life that surrounds us. The farther science travels into the future, the clearer it becomes how deeply Darwin's ideas are woven into the fabric of modern thought. His work is no longer confined to the study of animals or plants. It shapes medicine, psychology, computing, and even our understanding of society. In genetics, researchers use evolution to trace the origins of diseases and to design new treatments. In neuroscience, they explore how the brain itself is a product of adaptation, sculpted by millions of years of trial and error. Even in technology, engineers design machines that evolve through code, testing millions of variations until the best solution emerges. Everywhere, Darwin's quiet law of change is still at work, shaping progress in silence. And yet, behind all this progress, the heart of his story remains simple. A man who took time to look. In an age that worships speed, Darwin's slow, deliberate pace feels almost sacred. His notebooks reveal not the urgency of a genius racing toward discovery, but the calm persistence of a gardener tending to thought. He observed before he theorized, listened before he wrote, doubted before he claimed. That patience, the refusal to force truth before it was ready, became his greatest strength. His life reminds us that wisdom often grows best in silence. As the natural world faces new dangers, Darwin's voice seems to return, soft but insistent. His work showed that every living thing depends on the conditions around it. Change one factor, the temperature, the food, the shelter, and the web shifts. Humanity, now altering its environment faster than ever, has become both participant and author in evolution's story. Species vanish before new ones can appear. Forests fall, oceans warm, and nature adapts in ways no one can predict. The lesson Darwin left us is both beautiful and sobering. The same forces that create life can also erase it. Still, there is hope in his vision. For Darwin, change was never an ending. It was renewal. Extinction, though tragic, opened the door for new forms to emerge. Adaptation was not cruelty, but resilience. He believed that nature, given time, always finds a way to continue. That belief has become the foundation of conservation efforts today. Every reforestation project, every species saved from the brink, echoes the optimism of his work. The faith that life, though fragile, is endlessly resourceful. Visiting Downhouse today feels like stepping into a different rhythm of existence. The trees still sway with the same wind he once felt. His study remains almost untouched. The microscope on the desk, the glass jars on the shelves, the walking stick near the door. It's easy to imagine him there, leaning over a page, thinking not of fame or revolution, but of a single question. How does life persist? That question still drives humanity, and each time we find an answer, in a cell, a forest, a heartbeat, we return, knowingly or not, to Darwin's gift. The understanding that all of existence, from the smallest seed to the greatest star, is connected through time, change, and the quiet will to endure. As time moved deeper into the 21st century, Darwin's ideas began to take on new forms of meaning. What had once been a scientific revolution became a philosophy of existence, a way of understanding not only how life works, but why it persists. His concept of evolution, life adapting through endless variation, resonated far beyond biology. Economists used it to describe markets, artists used it to explain creativity, psychologists used it to explore behavior and emotion. Darwin's theory had become more than science. It was a lens for viewing all transformation. Yet amid this expansion, the heart of his message stayed grounded in humility. Darwin never claimed that nature was cruel or mechanical. To him, the struggle for life contained both hardship and grace. Every failure, every extinction, made room for renewal. Evolution was not simply survival of the strongest. It was the persistence of the adaptable, the sensitive, the cooperative. In that balance lay the quiet beauty he saw in the natural world. It was a vision both tender and true, one that continues to echo in every act of discovery. In the modern age, humanity stands at a strange threshold. Technology now gives humans the ability to direct evolution itself, editing genes, designing new organisms, even planning to adapt life for other planets. The same curiosity that drove Darwin to study finches now drives scientists to create artificial forms of life. Yet each step forward brings the same question he once faced. What does it mean to be part of nature and not above it? Darwin's answer, though written in gentler times, still holds. Man in his arrogance thinks himself a great work, worthy of the interposition of a deity. More humble, and I believe truer, to consider him created from animals. Those words remain a mirror, reminding us of both our greatness and our smallness. In universities, Darwin's legacy is taught not as dogma, but as living thought. Researchers continue to test and refine his principles, finding new layers of complexity in the dance between genes and environment. They have discovered that evolution is not linear but branching, fluid, responsive, an intricate web that never stops shifting. Even culture and language evolve, adapting through contact and need. Everything that grows, thinks, or changes follows the same rhythm he first traced. Beyond science, Darwin's story still inspires ordinary people. His life shows that patience can be revolutionary, that quiet observation can rewrite the world. He worked not for fame, but for understanding. In a time when the world moves at impossible speed, his calm example offers something radical, the reminder that truth often reveals itself slowly. If Darwin could see humanity now, mapping genomes, exploring Mars, building machines that learn, he might feel wonder, but also caution. He would recognize the same creative spark that nature herself possesses, the urge to adapt, to reach beyond the known. And perhaps he would whisper the lesson that guided his own life, that evolution, whether of species or ideas, is not a race but a rhythm, one that asks for patience, humility, and awe before the great unfolding of time. As the decades passed, Darwin's influence became so deeply rooted in human understanding that it was easy to forget how revolutionary it once was. His ideas had transformed from controversy into common language, woven into how people saw medicine, ecology, psychology, even technology. Yet beneath all the scientific triumphs lay something quieter, a philosophy of patience and interconnectedness. Darwin's greatest lesson was not merely that species evolve, but that everything in existence is linked through time and change. Life, he showed, is not a ladder but a web, a tapestry of endless relationships, each thread essential to the whole. The more humanity explored the universe, the more Darwin's truth seemed to repeat itself. When astronomers discovered planets around distant stars, they used the logic of evolution to imagine how life might arise elsewhere. The conditions that shaped Earth, water, warmth, chemistry, time, were no longer unique. It was as if Darwin's theory had leapt from Earth into the cosmos, suggesting that the principle of adaptation might govern the stars as well as the seas. His simple insight, that life grows by responding to its environment, had become a universal law of creation. Yet for all its grandeur, Darwin's story remains deeply human. He was not a man of wealth or conquest, but of curiosity. He showed that knowledge does not belong to the loud or the powerful, but to those who are willing to look closely and wait. His life is a reminder that transformation, in nature, in thought, in the self, happens slowly, almost invisibly. It asks for endurance, humility, and trust in time. In modern classrooms, children trace the same evolutionary tree he once sketched in pencil, their fingertips following branches that lead from ancient fish to birds, from reptiles to mammals, from apes to humans. What was once a dangerous idea now feels like a truth as natural as breathing, but in that acceptance lies something miraculous, a shared story that unites every living being. Darwin's work, more than any creed or empire, has given humanity a sense of belonging to the same unfolding journey of life. Scientists today carry his legacy into new frontiers. In studying climate change, they see evolution accelerating before their eyes. In the fields of genetics and biotechnology, they manipulate DNA, the script of life that Darwin could only imagine, and yet, in every lab and every expedition, his quiet presence lingers. The act of observing, of asking, of doubting still begins with the same humility he embodied. When one stands at Down House today, surrounded by the same fields he once walked, the world feels smaller, more intimate. The wind moves through the grass, the soil turns with worms, and the rhythm of life continues exactly as he described. Darwin's voice seems to echo there, not as a shout but as a whisper through the leaves. There is grandeur in this view of life. It is a sentence that transcends time, one that carries not only scientific truth, but something sacred, the reminder that to exist is to change, and to change is to be alive. More than 100 years after his death, Darwin's vision continues to shape how humanity defines its place in the universe. His idea that all life shares a common ancestry has grown from a bold theory into one of the deepest truths ever discovered. With each new fossil, each DNA sequence, each observation from space, the evidence only expands. He once wrote that endless forms most beautiful are still being evolved, and today scientists can watch those forms emerge in real time, from bacteria adapting to antibiotics to new species appearing in remote forests. The living world is no longer a mystery frozen in time, but a symphony of motion. What makes Darwin's legacy extraordinary is how it bridges science and emotion. His theory explains existence with reason, yet it also fills the imagination with wonder. To look at the Earth through his eyes is to see a planet alive with transformation. Rivers carving valleys, birds shaping their songs, plants reaching for light in a million quiet variations. He showed that beauty and struggle are inseparable, that every triumph of life is born from the balance of chance and necessity. This view of nature, both rational and poetic, continues to inspire not only biologists but writers, artists and philosophers who seek meaning in change. In modern times, his ideas have expanded beyond biology into the study of systems themselves. Economies, technologies, languages, and even civilizations follow patterns of variation and selection. Evolution has become a universal principle, not limited to genes, but to all things that grow and adapt. Yet Darwin would have smiled at how far the concept had travelled. For him, evolution was never about power. It was about persistence, about the soft rhythm through which life improves itself by surviving. He understood that creation is not a single act, but a process that never ends. At the same time, the world now faces questions Darwin could never have imagined. Humanity's ability to alter the planet, to change the climate, modify genomes, and create artificial intelligence makes us participants in evolution in a way no species before has been. His theory now turns inward, asking not only how life changes, but how we will choose to guide that change. Will we act as caretakers or as disruptors? In this new era, his words sound less like history and more like prophecy. And yet, in the midst of complexity, his message remains beautifully simple. observe, question, respect. These were his guiding principles, and they remain the foundation of every honest search for truth. Darwin's life proves that knowledge grows from patience, from the courage to sit quietly and listen to the world until it speaks. His journey, from the decks of the Beagle to the peace of his garden, is a testament to what happens when curiosity becomes devotion. Perhaps this is why his name endures not as a monument, but as a living presence. He did not conquer, he connected. He did not preach, he discovered. And through that discovery, he gave humanity the greatest gift of all, the understanding that we are part of a vast, continuous story, still being written, one heartbeat and one generation at a time. The world Darwin helped to describe is still unfolding in ways that would have astonished him. In the age of genetics, his idea of descent with modification has become a visible, measurable process. Scientists can now trace the entire history of species through their DNA, following the invisible lines that link every living thing. The story of evolution, once written in bones and stones, now exists within each cell. What Darwin could only imagine through patient observation, we can now see directly, life revealing its memory molecule by molecule. Yet even with such clarity, the mystery remains as vast as ever. The deeper we look, the more miraculous the simplicity of his idea seems. Darwin's concept of natural selection has proven not only true but endlessly adaptable. In medicine, it explains how viruses mutate and how bacteria evolve resistance. In ecology, it shows why balance matters, how each species' survival depends on countless others. In psychology, it sheds light on the instincts that shape human behaviour. His theory, born from observations of finches and fossils, has become the backbone of understanding across nearly every field of science. And yet behind the equations and experiments, his quiet philosophy endures, that nature, given time, always finds a way. As humanity faces an uncertain future, Darwin's insights take on new meaning. Climate change, extinction, and the reshaping of ecosystems have made evolution visible on a human timescale. Species are adapting or disappearing before our eyes. The lesson that life must change to survive is no longer abstract. It is happening now, everywhere. But in this urgency, there is also hope, because Darwin's work teaches that adaptation is not surrender, but resilience. Change is not the enemy. It is the essence of life. In art, literature, and film, Darwin continues to inspire visions of transformation. His name has become a metaphor for discovery, patience, and the courage to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Artists depict him not as a distant scholar, but as a wanderer, a man leaning into the wind on the deck of the Beagle, eyes open to the unknown. That image endures because it captures something universal, the longing to understand our place within the vast chain of being. Though technology now allows humanity to manipulate genes, and perhaps one day create new forms of life, Darwin's message remains a compass. He would remind us that knowledge without humility can be dangerous. His work was never about control but comprehension, not about reshaping nature but recognizing that we are part of it. In that awareness lies both wisdom and peace. If Darwin's voice could reach across centuries, it might say the same simple truth he once wrote in his notebook. From the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted objects we are capable of conceiving, life, intelligence, and love, have been and are being evolved. In those words, he gave the world not only a theory, but a perspective, that even in struggle, life's purpose is creation, and in change, there is always the quiet promise of continuation. In the quiet corners of modern science, Darwin's presence still feels alive. Every discovery about genetics, ecosystems, or animal behavior carries his shadow, a reminder of the first man who connected it all. His theory has evolved as much as the species it describes, expanding to include cooperation, complexity, and even chance as forces of change. What began as an idea written by candlelight in the 19th century now defines how humanity sees life itself, and yet, beyond all the scientific precision, what lingers most is the poetry of his thought, that life, in its endless variety, is one long, unfinished conversation between matter and time. The elegance of Darwin's idea lies in its simplicity. He showed that the miracle of creation does not need to be sudden or divine. It can unfold slowly, beautifully, through small differences repeated over ages. To him, this made nature more sacred, not less. There is grandeur in this view of life, he wrote, and that line continues to resonate because it captures both the humility and wonder of existence. He saw that life was not a series of isolated events, but a continuous process, one that connects the living, the dead, and the yet-to-be-born in a single thread of being. Today, that understanding is everywhere. Geneticists compare DNA across species and find proof of our shared ancestry written in code. Biologists watch adaptation occur in days instead of centuries. Philosophers reflect on what it means to live in a world where everything, even thought, is fluid. Artists paint the patterns of evolution into the shapes of galaxies and minds. The borders between disciplines blur, and in that blurring Darwin's legacy grows stronger. Still, his lesson is not only about science, it is about perspective. He reminds us that change is not a tragedy, but a law, that the loss of one form often gives rise to another. The extinction of a creature, while heartbreaking, makes room for new life to emerge. Evolution is not cruelty, it is continuity. To understand that is to accept both the beauty and the sorrow of nature, the balance that keeps existence alive. If Darwin could look upon the earth today, he would see both triumph and warning. He would marvel at how humanity has mapped the genome, photographed black holes, and decoded the chemistry of life. Yet he would also see how easily we forget our place within the system he described. We bend nature to our will, forgetting that we too are shaped by it. His words would serve as a quiet reminder that progress without respect risks destroying the very fabric it depends upon. Downhouse still stands as a symbol of that balance. The home of a thinker who found universes in a worm's burrow and eternity in a single flower. It teaches that wisdom begins in observation, not ownership. As visitors walk the same path Darwin once did, they trace not just his footsteps, but the larger path of thought he opened. In every whisper of the wind, in every rustle of leaves, there is the same truth he once uncovered, that life is never still, and that within every change lies the secret of becoming. The longer one studies Darwin's life, the clearer it becomes that his genius was not born from brilliance alone, but from devotion. He devoted himself not to glory, but to the truth hidden in plain sight, the slow, patient processes that shape the world. He had no laboratory, no advanced tools, no formal scientific training beyond his curiosity. What he possessed instead was persistence. For him, every fallen leaf, every bird's call, every grain of soil was part of a grand experiment already taking place. He simply listened to what nature was trying to say. That ability, to listen rather than impose, is what made him timeless. In many ways, Darwin's greatest creation was not the theory of evolution, but a new kind of relationship between humanity and nature. Before him, people saw the natural world as something separate, a backdrop for human life. After him, it became a mirror. His work revealed that humans were not exceptions in creation, but participants within it. Every cell, every instinct, every breath carried the echo of ancient life. The wall between the observer and the observed quietly dissolved, replaced by a feeling of belonging. That realization changed more than science. It changed identity itself. The philosophical impact of Darwin's work continues to unfold. His ideas open the door to existential questions. If life evolves without design, what gives it meaning? Is purpose something we inherit or something we create? For some, these thoughts brought unease. for others, liberation. Darwin himself approached them with humility. He once admitted that his discoveries made him feel both exalted and diminished. Exalted by the grandeur of nature, diminished by the realization of his own smallness within it. Yet in that humility lay peace. He did not need the universe to revolve around humanity. It was enough to be part of it. His writings, when read today, feel almost meditative. The rhythm of his sentences mirrors the rhythm of the natural world, unhurried, deliberate, precise. He spoke not to convince, but to illuminate. Even his letters reveal a tenderness often missing from scientific discourse. He expressed gratitude to his colleagues, affection to his family, and awe toward the mysteries he could never fully solve. For Darwin, wonder was not a passing emotion, but a form of discipline. To wonder was to see clearly, and to see clearly was the beginning of understanding. As the 21st century grapples with questions of technology, ethics, and the fate of the planet, Darwin's voice feels increasingly relevant. His worldview was neither pessimistic nor naive. It was balanced. He understood that nature is both creative and destructive, that progress is inseparable from loss. In that duality lies wisdom, the awareness that everything evolves through tension, and that life's strength lies in its capacity to change. Perhaps this is why Darwin's story endures so powerfully. It speaks not only to scientists, but to anyone searching for meaning amid uncertainty. He reminds us that to live is to adapt, to learn, to let go of certainty. Evolution is not only a biological process, it is a human one. And in that truth, quiet, eternal, endlessly unfolding, Darwin's legacy continues to evolve, just like life itself. By the time the world fully embraced Darwin's theory, it had already begun shaping a new moral awareness. His realization that all living things share a common ancestry carried implications far beyond science. It dissolved boundaries between species and even between nations, suggesting that empathy itself might be an evolved instinct, one that binds all forms of life. The idea that humans are part of a vast biological family encouraged compassion, humility, and a sense of shared destiny. In an age of division and competition, Darwin's message quietly urged connection. He had shown that cooperation, not domination, is the key to survival. That truth, simple yet profound, continues to echo through every field of human endeavour. Modern thinkers have come to see Darwin not as a destroyer of meaning, but as a creator of new meaning. His work replaced the illusion of separateness with the wonder of unity. To understand evolution is to understand relationship between predator and prey, tree and soil, human and planet. It is the understanding that the air we breathe, the food we eat, and even the language we speak are products of countless interactions stretching back billions of years. The story of evolution is not just biological, it is personal. Every heartbeat carries within it the rhythm of Earth's entire history. In contemporary culture, Darwin's name appears everywhere, in classrooms, in documentaries, even in conversations about human progress and technology. His theory has become a guiding metaphor for adaptation and innovation. Businesses evolve, art evolves, ideas evolve. The principle he uncovered has transcended its scientific roots and become a law of thought itself. And yet, amid all this expansion, his message of patience remains largely forgotten. He spent decades gathering evidence before publishing, never rushing, never forcing a conclusion. In a world obsessed with speed, his slowness feels almost revolutionary. Darwin's influence also helped to humanize science. He reminded future generations that discovery is not about conquest, but understanding. He was deeply aware of the emotional weight of knowledge, how it can both uplift and unsettle. When his ideas challenged established beliefs, he did not celebrate victory. He felt sorrow for the confusion they caused. It is as though one were confessing a murder, he once said of presenting his theory. That empathy toward his readers and peers made him not only a great scientist, but a rare kind of human being, one who valued truth and tenderness equally. As the world faces new uncertainties, Darwin's lessons feel prophetic. He taught that stability is an illusion, that strength lies in adaptation, and that life's beauty is inseparable from its fragility. Those truths extend far beyond biology. Societies, ideas, and relationships evolve in the same way, shaped by trial, variation, and resilience. To survive is to change. To resist change is to vanish. When we speak of progress, we are, knowingly or not, speaking Darwin's language. His gift was not only a map of the past, but a compass for the future. He showed that life, though unpredictable, follows a pattern of transformation, one that continues, quietly, within and around us. Through him, humanity learned to see itself not as the centre of creation, but as one of its infinite expressions. The story of Charles Darwin ends not with finality, but with continuation, fitting for a man who taught the world that nothing living is ever truly finished. His ideas have outlived him, growing, branching, and adapting much like the species he once studied. What began as a whisper of thought on a small ship in the 1830s has become a universal language through which humanity now understands itself. The voyage of the Beagle ended long ago, but the voyage of discovery it inspired still sails forward, carried by generations of thinkers who trace their curiosity back to his calm wonder. Darwin's life reminds us that the world's greatest revolutions can be quiet. He never shouted his truth. He observed, doubted, and refined it until it spoke for itself. In an age of noise and speed, his patience stands as a counterexample, proof that progress often requires stillness. He spent decades watching barnacles and worms, studying small details most would overlook. Yet from those humble studies arose a vision vast enough to encompass the entire planet. His genius lay not in seeing what others could not, but in realizing the importance of what everyone ignored. Today, his influence reaches into places he could never have imagined. His words echo in climate science, in artificial intelligence, in the study of language, in art that explores time and transformation. Evolution has become more than a biological process. It has become a metaphor for all growth, personal, cultural, and cosmic. Each generation reinterprets his theory through its own lens, yet the heart of it remains unchanged, that life is a continuous act of becoming, driven by adaptation and the passage of time. There is comfort in that thought. For Darwin, evolution was not a story of perfection but of persistence. Nature, he realized, is full of struggle, yet out of struggle comes diversity, resilience, and wonder. To accept evolution is to accept imperfection, to understand that beauty lies not in flawlessness but in transformation. That truth extends to humanity itself. We too are evolving, in thought, in compassion, in the way we see our place on earth. If one stands today in the quiet garden of Downhouse, this same garden Darwin tended for 40 years, the world feels both unchanged and eternal. The trees he planted still rise toward the sky, the soil still moves with worms he once studied, and the air still hums with life. His presence lingers there, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that knowledge, like nature, never rests. From so simple a beginning, he wrote, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. Those words, the closing line of On the Origin of Species, are more than the end of a book. They are the quiet heartbeat of his entire philosophy. They remind us that creation is not a miracle of the past, but a constant unfolding of the present. And so, Darwin's story closes as it began, not with noise, but with wonder. The man who explained life's secret left us not answers, but a way of seeing, that every leaf, every creature, every heartbeat is part of the same long, extraordinary journey, the one that began before us, continues within us, and will outlast us, evolving still, forever becoming.